Hello everyone. Our chain has been assembled and soldered. There is no clasp yet. We'll make it and add it to the chain once the chain has been made oval and twisted. Before we do that, we need to check that all the links are well soldered. The next steps will put a lot of stress on the seams, so we need to inspect them first. There are two possible issues. If there is not enough solder, more solder will need to be added to prevent it from cracking or breaking when we twist the chain. Or there might be too much solder with big blobs of solder on the seam. This will cause problems later too, and it will be it's generally better to remove the link, put a fresh one, but if it's not too bad, you can sand it as I do here. This is how you make a sanding stick. You take a sheet of emery or sandpaper and you place the stick on the sandpaper and trace a line with a pen following the edge closely. This will give us nice crisp edges for sanding more precisely. And you repeat this process for each edge of the stick. And then we'll crease and fold the sandpaper on the lines, and we will wrap the stick with the sandpaper. But we need to cut it first. You can leave a little bit of a handle at one end, and then use the masking tape to secure the paper on the stick. It will be easy to remove the sandpaper and then replace it when it is worn out. So you see the crisp edges there. And I've written one, which is the grit of this particular sandpaper. So this is how you would clean up the excess solder. Again, ideally, we would not need to do that. It's only very light sanding. Remember, we cannot change the shape or the size of the wire. So now that it is all clean, we are ready for the next step. There is no need to anneal because the chain was soldered and has not been work hardened since. We have to make sure before we make the links oval that the seam is on the side of each link. It will be hidden once the chain is finished. We are going to use the parallel pliers to make the links oval. Try to keep the same pressure when squeezing so that the ovals are even and consistent. Don't squeeze all at once when you apply pressure. Apply pressure slowly. And you work on your links, on each link, one by one. Keep an eye on your seams. Some might open or crack. If that happens, you'll have to repair, either add solder or even replace the link with a fresh new one. When you are done, the chain will be work hardened and will need to be annealed before we go to the next step. But we'll have to do one more thing before that. That's what I'm going to show you next. So the seam is on the side, always. Okay, so ready for the next step. Before we anneal the chain, we'll have to coat it with yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a natural mineral, a clay, often used as a brown or yellow-brown pigment for painting, for instance. But it is also very useful for us jewelers because it has anti-flux properties. It can be used to protect an area that has been soldered and to prevent that solder from flowing again. So we'll mix a small quantity of the powder with water to make mud, and we'll coat the entire chain with that. It should not be too runny, it should be too messy, and if it dries out, you just need to add a little bit more water. Yellow ochre is a solder inhibitor. It acts as a heat shield on the seam and prevents the solder from flowing when it is exposed to heat. So because of that, we have to make sure we keep our hands clean. Otherwise, we would contaminate our tools and our work or the brick. So we'll use the side of the brick for this. And this way we'll keep the top of the brick perfectly clean. We'll use a brush to coat the chain with the yellow ochre. And I would make sure that it is a thick coat and that every part of the chain is covered. Again, avoid touching with your hands. It's not toxic, but it is quite messy. And make sure you do it on both sides. Okay, so now that it is covered with yellow ochre, we are ready for the next step, which is annealing. We'll use an annealing flame. So mostly a lot of propane and a little less oxygen, and the flame will have an orange tip at the end. It will be more difficult to see the usual indicators that tell us that the metal is annealed. The yellow ochre will turn darker from yellow to dark brown. That's an indicator. And at that point, you should be able to see a dark reddish glow coming from the metal underneath the ochre, indicating that the metal is annealed. Do not overheat. Pull the flame away as soon as you see this glow of the metal. Let the chain air cool once it's all annealed. Wash it thoroughly before you put it in the pickle. For the next step, which I'm not showing here, you'll use a round draw plate and a vise to pull the chain through and to even out the links. As before, you will pull with a steady, even motion to avoid marking the wire. To be able to do that, we'll have to add handles at each end of the chain. Use small sections of the same silver wire and put one handle at each end of your chain. And we'll use these handles to hold the chain with the draw tongs without damaging the links. To twist the chain, put one handle into the vise, tighten the vise, and using the other handle, you'll use the draw tongs to pull and twist the chain at the same time. You will have to repeat this process a few times, maybe 10 times or a dozen times. Every time you must twist in the same direction. As you can see here, it's better to over twist the chain. You need to anneal every 2 or 3 twists as your chain will become work hardened. How do you know when the chain is twisted enough? When it lays perfectly flat. That's the test. The next step will be to make the S hook for the chain. Thanks for watching.